Have you ever had one of those moments where your life splits into before and after? Mine happened at my 30th anniversary party. The country club ballroom was filled with 150 of our closest friends. Champagne was flowing. A beautiful cake had James and Eleanor, 30 years written in silver icing. It was the perfect celebration until my husband of 3 decades stood up, clinked his glass for attention, and shattered everything. "I have an announcement," James said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "Eleanor has been a good wife, but at 60, well, let's be honest, we want different things now." Then he gestured toward the door, where a woman in her early 30s stood in a designer red dress, looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine. "This is Chloe. She's 35, brilliant, and understands what I need at this stage in my life. She represents the future I deserve." The room went so quiet you could hear ice melting in drinks. Friends we'd known for decades stared in horror. Our pastor looked like he might faint, and James stood there smiling, completely confident that he'd orchestrated my complete humiliation. He expected tears, a scene maybe for me to run from the room so he could play the victim with his emotional wife. Instead, I smiled, reached into my purse, and pulled out a manila envelope I'd been carrying for precisely this moment. "Happy anniversary, James," I said, handing it to him. "I brought you something, too." The confusion on his face as he took that envelope was priceless. He had no idea that I'd known about his affair for months, no idea that I'd been preparing, no idea that his dependent housewife had secrets of her own. What happened next changed everything, not just for James and his girlfriend, but for me. Turns out, life at 60 isn't about winding down. Sometimes, it's about finally revealing who you've been all along. Before we continue, please leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe to the Still Got It True Stories channel. We're creating a community of incredible people who know that our best chapters can happen at any age. Now, back to the story. You're probably wondering how I got here, 60 years old, standing in a country club, holding an envelope that would change our lives forever. Let me back up and tell you about the woman behind the carefully chosen anniversary dress. I met James in 1993 at a charity fundraiser. He was 32, ambitious, with a charming smile and big dreams. I was 30, working as an office manager at a law firm, and had just buried my grandmother. The only person who ever truly saw me. James pursued me with flowers and persistent phone calls. 6 months later, we were married. For the next 30 years, I became what everyone expected, the quintessential corporate wife. I hosted dinner parties where James could impress clients. I joined the right committees. I wore the right clothes. I said the right things. When our daughter Melissa was born in 1997, I stepped back from my part-time work to focus on raising her. "Eleanor keeps our world turning," James would say, his arm around my waist at company functions. "I make the money, but she makes everything else happen." Everyone would nod and smile at this perfect arrangement. What James didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I had been silently building something of my own all along. My grandmother, Rose, was a force of nature. She came to America in 1945 with nothing but determination and a sharp mind for business. By the 1970s, she had built a modest real estate empire, buying properties when nobody believed a woman could. She'd been widowed young and never remarried. "Men can be wonderful companions, Eleanor," she told me once, "but never mistake companionship for security." When she died just 2 months before I met James, she left me something unexpected, $12 million and a letter. I still have that letter, yellowed and creased from being unfolded and reread countless times over the years. "My dearest Eleanor," it began, "this money represents my life's work, but more importantly, it represents freedom. In my generation, a woman without her own money was at the mercy of men's decisions. I've watched too many brilliant women diminish themselves because they had no economic power. Don't tell anyone about this inheritance, not your friends, not your future husband. Watch how people treat you when they think you have nothing to offer but yourself. Then you'll know who truly deserves your heart." So that's exactly what I did. I kept my inheritance secret, even from James's, secret from James. I wanted to know, would he love me or for what I could provide? When we married, I hired a financial advisor, Margaret, a shrewd woman in her 50s who became my ally and eventually my friend. Together, we developed a strategy. I would invest my inheritance carefully, building wealth independently while living within the lifestyle James's income provided. Think of it as a parallel universe. Margaret said during one of our early meetings, one where your financial decisions are completely your own. In the beginning, it was almost like a game. I'd sit at our kitchen table, reviewing James's monthly budget with him, nodding seriously about cutting back on groceries to save for our vacation. Then the next day, I'd meet with Margaret to discuss which commercial property we should acquire next. As James's career progressed, I strategically positioned him for success without him ever knowing. That big client who just happened to call him back after months of cold calls. I'd met the CEO at a charity function and mentioned James's business, the bank that approved his first business loan despite his lack of collateral. They were managing part of my portfolio, the office space he negotiated such a great deal on, owned by one of my shell companies. The truth is, James wasn't particularly talented or hot. He was mediocre, at best. Coasting on connections he didn't know I was providing, and opportunities that mysteriously fell into his lap. Without my invisible hand guiding his career, he would have remained a middle manager somewhere, complaining about being overlooked. By our 10th anniversary, my initial $12 million had grown to $20 million. By our 20th, it was $35 million. Now, after 30 years, my personal net worth was just over $40 million, all completely unknown to the man who paraded around town, taking credit for our lifestyle. To all appearances, we were living the classic American success story: successful businessman, supportive wife, beautiful daughter, comfortable retirement on the horizon. Only Margaret and my accountant knew the truth. James's entire career had been an elaborate illusion, I maintained, partly out of curiosity to see how far his ego would take him. Our daughter, Melissa, grew up watching her father take credit for our lifestyle while I smiled and nodded. As she got older, I worried about the message this sent. When she turned 21, after she graduated college, I took her to lunch and told her everything. "Mom," she said, looking at me with wide eyes after I finished explaining, "why would you let Dad think he's been supporting us all these years when it's really been you?" I considered my answer carefully. Your father needed to feel important, and I needed to know who he really was. For a long time, that arrangement worked for both of us. Melissa shook her head. "But doesn't it bother you that he doesn't know the real you?" That question stayed with me. Did James know the real me? Did I even know who I was anymore after 3 decades of playing a role? Our marriage wasn't unhappy. Exactly. We had our routines. James worked what he considered long hours, though I knew he spent most afternoons at the golf course with clients. I managed our social calendar and household. We took nice vacations that James would brag about paying for. We attended Melissa's graduation and celebrated her first job. We didn't fight much. We didn't talk much either. Not about anything substantial. Our conversations revolved around schedules, social obligations, and James's endless stories about his business prowess. Physical closeness had faded years ago, something I attributed to age and familiarity rather than any deeper problem. James often worked late and traveled for business, sometimes for days at a time. I filled my days with charity work, book clubs, and secret meetings with Margaret about my latest investments. I was comfortable, not happy, not unhappy, just settled. I assumed James felt the same way. After 30 years, you stop expecting surprises. You stop looking too closely at credit card statements or wondering why your husband's business trips suddenly require a new cologne. That changed 3 months ago. I was doing my monthly review of our finances, a habit I'd maintained throughout our marriage to maintain the illusion that I was carefully managing James's money. When I noticed something odd, there were charges from jewelry stores for items that had never made their way to my wrist or ears, hotel charges in our own city on nights when James claimed to be working late, dinner receipts for 2 at restaurants far more expensive than the places we typically dined. My first thought was identity theft. I actually called the credit card company to report suspicious activity. "Mrs. Burton," the representative said, "these charges all appear to have been made in person with a physical card. The signature matches the one we have on file." I thanked her and hung up, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. I told myself there must be a reasonable explanation, perhaps an anniversary surprise. Our 30th was coming up in 3 months. Maybe they were client dinners. But James had always kept business expenses on his corporate card. I remembered my grandmother's words, "Trust your instincts, Eleanor. They're usually right." The next day, I made a call I never thought I'd make. Carl Jenkins was a private investigator recommended by my attorney, discreet, thorough, and experienced with high net worth clients. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles from my home. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Carl didn't react beyond a slight nod. I'll need his schedule, photos, regular haunts, and I should warn you, Mrs. Burton, people rarely hire me unless they already know the answer. They just need proof. I slid an envelope across the table with James's information. How long will this take? Give me a week, he said. I'll be in touch. That week was the longest of my life. I went through the Motions Charity Committee meetings, dinner with friends, the usual household management all, while wondering who my husband really was. The answer came in a thick manila envelope delivered to a P.O. box I had set up specifically for this purpose. Inside were photos, transcripts of conversations, credit card statements, and a detailed report of James's activities for the past week. The woman's name was Chloe Reynolds. She was 35 years old, an account executive at a marketing firm that sometimes worked with James's company. The photos showed them dining together, entering hotels together, shopping for jewelry together. There were pictures of them looking at apartments, discussing furniture arrangements, planning what appeared to be a shared future. But it was the transcribed conversations that truly opened my eyes. When are you finally going to leave her? Chloe's voice asked in a recording made at a restaurant. Soon, James had replied. The anniversary party will be perfect. Everyone will be there. I'll make the announcement, and it will be done. Won't she make a scene? Chloe asked. James laughed, a sound I recognized, but with a cruelty I'd never heard before. Eleanor, no, she's completely dependent on me. Has been for 30 years. She'll be too shocked to do anything but cry quietly. By Monday, I'll have moved out, and you and I can start our life together. And she gets what? Exactly. Whatever I decide to give her, James said confidently. Which won't be much. She hasn't worked in decades. She has no skills, no resources of her own. She'll take whatever settlement I offer because she'll have no choice. They had no idea how wrong they were, and I had 3 months to prepare for the anniversary party they thought would be my humiliation. The private investigator's report landed on a Tuesday morning. Just as James was off at his usual breakfast meeting, the manila folder was thicker than I expected. My hands trembled as I opened it. Photos spilled out first. James and Chloe at candlelit dinners, tucked into booths at restaurants I'd never stepped foot in. James and Chloe slipping into hotels on nights he told me he was traveling for work. And, worst of all, James and Chloe trying on engagement rings in the same jewelry store where, 30 years ago, he'd bought mine. But this wasn't just infidelity. This was a blueprint for a new life. There they were, touring high-rise condos, testing out couches in furniture galleries, building something permanent together. Then came the audio recordings. I sat at the kitchen table and listened, hands clenched, stomach in knots. James's voice crackled through the device. She's gotten so comfortable. Eleanor just assumes I'll always be there, always providing. She has no clue what the real world looks like, Chloe responded, her tone low and deliberate. How long, until you leave her? Soon, he said with a laugh. She's a housewife. No job, no money, no skills. She'll take whatever I give her and call it a win. I paused the recording. Decades of partnership, gone, just like that. I hit play again. Chloe asked about the house. James didn't hesitate. It'll be ours. Everything will. The house, the cars, the business. Eleanor, she'd be lucky to land in a one-bedroom somewhere near a strip mall. They laughed at me. Then came the part that cut deepest. She's weak, James said. Always has been. I know her. That word echoed. Weak. That's what he thought of me. The report kept going. More recordings, more conversations, more proof that my husband had been orchestrating this betrayal for months with Chloe, with his golf buddies, with his secretary. Everyone knew, except me. But it wasn't just what he'd done. It was how he spoke about me. To one of his friends on the golf course, he said, I've outgrown her. She doesn't push me, doesn't get what it takes to succeed. Chloe gets it. She's ambitious. She makes me want more. That company retreat in Hawaii, a week with Chloe, the late-night client meetings, romantic getaways. He was wining and dining her on our joint accounts, gifting her jewelry, a leased apartment, even a car. And then the text that turned my blood to ice. I want to do it publicly, James had written, at our anniversary party. She's always bragged about our marriage. I want to show everyone what she really is, a dependent, pitiful woman who got lucky. Chloe had replied with a string of laughing emojis that morning. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by wedding photos and financial statements. And instead of falling apart, I found something else. Clarity. I called my lawyer. I need to protect my assets, I said quietly. What assets, Eleanor? He asked. The ones James doesn't know about. My inheritance, my investments, my business holdings. I'd built a quiet fortune while James played the big man. The lawyer was stunned. You're telling me you've been funding your family's lifestyle all this time? Yes, I said. And James had no idea. For the next 3 months, I played the part, the good wife, the party planner, the fool. Behind the scenes, I documented every expense he funneled to Chloe. I moved my assets, consulted advisors, built my wall, and James remained oblivious. He even asked me to help plan the anniversary party. Let's make it special, he said. 30 years, it deserves something big. Absolutely, I smiled. A night no one will forget. I booked the country club, ordered the flowers, and coordinated the menu. I even suggested he write a speech. Tell everyone how you really feel, I said. Make it count. Every evening, he practiced in front of our mirror. I watched from the doorway, quiet. As the party neared, he grew colder, more distant. He criticized my cooking, my clothes, my voice, but I stayed calm, focused, and ready. The night arrived. I wore my best dress, the diamonds he'd once given me, and the calm of a woman who knew exactly what was coming. As we walked in, he squeezed my hand. Thank you for being such a great wife, Eleanor. Tonight changes everything. I smiled back. Yes, it really does. The room glowed with well-wishers, friends, neighbors, business partners, all there to toast 30 years of marriage. Unaware they were in the front row for its demolition, I accepted every compliment graciously. You two are an inspiration. Thank you, I replied. Tonight will be unforgettable. James kept checking the door. Chloe was late. He was texting her, nervous. Finally, he pulled me aside. Promise me, he said, no matter what happens tonight, you'll stay dignified. Don't make a scene. I looked him straight in the eye. James, I promise I'll handle tonight with all the dignity it deserves. He looked relieved. He had no idea. And then, right on cue, she walked in. Chloe walked into our anniversary party in a red designer dress. The symbolism hit everyone in the room at once. She looked radiant, self-assured, and smug, as if she'd already taken over my life and redecorated it. James's face lit up like he'd just won an award. He straightened his tie, took a deep breath, and lifted his champagne glass. Showtime. I could see the speech forming in his mind. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice booming across the country club's ballroom. Thank you for being here tonight to celebrate 30 years of marriage. The crowd hushed. Smiles turned expectant. Mrs. Johnson, our sweet neighbor, actually pressed a hand to her heart. Our pastor raised his glass, clearly bracing for a heartfelt tribute. 30 years ago, James continued, puffing up with pride, I married a beautiful young woman. Eleanor has been a good wife and mother. She's kept the house running, supported my career, and helped me become the man I am today. Polite nods, a few sentimental glances, but life is about growth. He pivoted, about progress, about knowing when it's time for a new chapter. The shift was sharp enough to sting. Faces turned uncertain. Claire, my maid of honor, looked like someone had just knocked the wind out of her. And then he looked directly at me. I've outgrown this marriage. Eleanor, you're 60, and it shows. Your best years are behind you. I need a partner who can match my energy and ambition. Someone who understands success in today's world. The silence was absolute. People stared. Shock rippled through the crowd. A few gasps. Mrs. Johnson's hand now covered her mouth. Our pastor was frozen. Some guests looked ready to walk out. James extended his arm. Chloe walked up and slid hers through it, beaming. Everyone, meet Chloe Reynolds. She's not just my business partner. She's my life partner. At 35, she embodies the ambition and sophistication that, frankly, Eleanor never developed. Chloe stepped forward with the poise of a woman accepting an award. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. Thank you, James. Some chapters end so better ones can begin. I know this might be difficult, but sometimes the hard choice is the right one for everyone. Eleanor, I hope you understand. The gall. I could hear the murmurs starting to swirl. Is this real? He's doing this here, at their anniversary party. Some guests stood up, others looked too stunned to move. James raised a hand. I know this is unexpected, but I wanted to be honest. You've all been part of our journey. Eleanor and I are divorcing, and Chloe and I are starting a new life together. All eyes turned to me. 150 pairs. This was the moment he'd bet everything on. My breakdown, my humiliation, my public unraveling, the performance that would justify his betrayal and paint Chloe as the savior. Instead, I smiled, calm, poised, unbothered. "James," I said, my voice even and clear, "you're absolutely right. Some chapters do need to end." I reached into my purse and pulled out the manila envelope I'd carried for months. "I brought you a little anniversary gift, too, darling." He took it, still basking in the glow of his self-importance. Maybe he thought it was a heartfelt letter, a desperate plea, a sad surrender. "See," he said to the crowd, "Eleanor's always been thoughtful. Even now, she's making this easier for everyone. She gets it." Chloe beamed, squeezing his arm like she'd just married a saint. James opened the envelope casually. That casualness lasted about 10 seconds. Then came confusion. Then came fear. His hands began to tremble. He flipped through the pages. Divorce papers, property deeds, business ownership documents, bank statements, legal agreements, and at the bottom, the prenup. "This can't be right," he muttered, his voice suddenly small. "These numbers, these names, this doesn't make sense." Chloe leaned in, her mask beginning to crack. "What is it, James? What's wrong? You said she didn't have any money. You said she was just a housewife." He couldn't answer, could barely stand. I stepped in, still calm. "Divorce papers citing adultery, with photos, bankruptcy filings for your company, property deeds for the house, cars, and that boat you love so much, business ownership records, my bank statements, and, of course, the prenup you signed 30 years ago with a lovely clause about infidelity." The guests leaned in, caught between disbelief and fascination. Chloe clutched his arm tighter, her tone rising. "What is she talking about? You said everything was yours. You said we'd have it all." I smiled sweetly. "Would you like me to explain it to our guests, honey? I know business documents can be tricky, especially when you've never actually read them." James said nothing. His silence said everything. I walked over to where James and Chloe stood, calm as ever, and took the microphone from the band. My smile hadn't faded. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began. "Since James shared his truth, I think it's only fair that I share mine." The room went still. Even the waitstaff froze. For 30 years, I've been known as James's wife, Melissa's mother, the woman who keeps the wheels turning quietly in the background, and I was happy in that role. But there are some things about our marriage even James doesn't know. I glanced at him. He was pale. Chloe clutched his arm like she was trying to keep him upright. "When I was younger, my grandmother left me $12 million. She was a brilliant businesswoman who taught me one rule: never let anyone else control your future. So, I didn't. I invested quietly and strategically over decades." A wave of gasps swept through the crowd. Mrs. Johnson dropped her champagne glass. "That $12 million became $40 million. I launched businesses, bought properties, built a portfolio, and that company James is so proud of. It started with my capital. That first big loan was secured by my assets. I've been the silent partner in 6 local businesses." I turned towards some familiar faces. "Mark, remember when James helped you expand your restaurant? My money. Sarah, your tech startup. My investment." Faces shifted from surprise to disbelief. People turned to look at James, who couldn't meet their gaze. "Our house, bought with my inheritance, the cars, the boat, this country club membership, Melissa's college tuition, even the credit cards James used to fund his after-all paid with my wealth." Chloe blinked rapidly. She looked ill. "That's impossible," she whispered. "You're just a housewife. You don't know anything about business." I smiled. "Sweetheart, I've been managing a multi-million-dollar portfolio since you were in braces. The apartment James leased for you, my money, the car, my money, the jewelry, the vacations, all of it, mine." James finally found his voice. "Eleanor, stop. You're embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and held it up. "Here's my bank statement, my investment portfolio, property deeds with my name on them." I handed the phone to Claire in the front row. Her eyes widened. "Eleanor," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "you're incredibly wealthy." I turned back to the room. I never needed James to know. I loved him. I wanted him to feel like the provider. I was happy to let him have that illusion. Now I turned directly to James. "But when you decided I was too old, too weak, too dependent, you made a fatal miscalculation. You mistook grace for weakness, silence for ignorance, support for submission." The guests were spellbound. "So, James, about that divorce you're so eager for, the house you promised Chloe, mine, the business you brag about, built with my capital, your credit cards, tied to my accounts." I looked around at our stunned audience. The man who just claimed I depended on him has actually been depending on me this entire time. "And Chloe, He wasn't offering you his success. He was offering you mine. Chloe turned to James, furious. You said you were rich. You said she had nothing. You promised me everything. James said nothing. He stood there, holding the envelope that proved otherwise. The best part, I said, soft and sharp. I've spent the last 3 months moving my assets. Those company accounts you thought were yours, frozen. The business you think you own. You'll find out Monday morning that I'm the majority stakeholder. Whispers erupted. Disbelief, disgust, awe. I handed the mic back to the bandleader and turned to leave. At the door, I paused. Oh, and James, you might want to have your lawyer explain to you my little anniversary gift, sweetheart. Then I walked out of the party, my party leaving behind the man who thought he was in control, and a room full of people who now knew better. By Monday morning, James discovered the full extent of what had happened. His company access cards no longer worked. His executive assistant greeted him with uncomfortable formality in the lobby rather than her usual cheerful welcome. When he tried to access the company accounts, he found them frozen. His email password had been changed. His name had been removed from the office directory. There must be some mistake, he kept telling everyone as he made increasingly desperate phone calls from the lobby. I'm the CEO. I founded this company. The truth that I held majority ownership of his business and had for nearly years was documented in papers he'd signed but never bothered to read. Without my financial backing, his company faced immediate bankruptcy. Years of his questionable financial decisions had been masked by my quiet interventions, my capital infusions, my relationships with investors who trusted me more than they'd ever trusted him. The board voted unanimously to remove him. They'd seen the evidence of his mismanagement, his reckless spending, his increasingly poor judgment. Many had been at our anniversary party. They'd witnessed his cruelty, his arrogance, his shocking lack of character. When presented with the financial evidence as well, they didn't hesitate. Chloe left him that very night. When the reality of James's financial situation became clear, that he was actually broke and had been dependent on me, her departure was faster than her arrival. She'd packed her things from his hotel room while he was still trying to get into his office building. The apartment lease James had signed for her, the car payments, the credit cards, everything was in my name. With a few signatures, I closed it all down. She had nothing from him because he had nothing to give. Our daughter, Melissa, who had witnessed the entire scene at the anniversary party, arrived at my door the next morning. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a determination in her expression. I recognized the same look I'd seen in my own mirror for months. Mom, I can't believe Dad did that to you publicly, she said, as we sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd first listened to those devastating recordings. But I'm so proud of how you handled it. You're incredible. I did what I had to do, I told her, squeezing her hand. I'm sorry you had to see it. Melissa shook her head. No, I needed to see it. All these years, I thought Dad was this brilliant businessman, and you were just, double quotes, she trailed off, embarrassed. Just the housewife. I finished for her. She nodded, looking ashamed. He always made it seem that way. Even to me, especially to me. She paused, tears forming. He called me yesterday, asking if he could stay with me until he sorted things out with your mother. As if this were some minor disagreement. What did you tell him? I asked. I told him he made his choice when he stood up in front of everyone we know and called you old and useless. Her voice cracked slightly. I told him I saw those papers. Mom, I know who really paid for my college, my wedding, everything. It was always you. That conversation with Melissa healed something in me I hadn't realized was broken. The recognition from my daughter meant more than the satisfaction of exposing James. James tried calling me repeatedly in those first days. His messages evolved from angry accusations to desperate pleas. You can't do this to me became please, Eleanor, let's talk about this. And finally, Eleanor, I made a terrible mistake. Can we work this out? I only responded once with a text message. James, you are absolutely right. Some chapters do need to end. The divorce was finalized with remarkable speed. The prenuptial agreement's adultery clause meant James received only what he'd brought into the marriage 30 years ago, which was essentially nothing. All those years of him believing he was the provider, the success story, the one with power gone in an instant. His attorney, upon reviewing the documents, advised him to sign immediately. You won't get a better deal, I heard, he told James. If this goes to court, you'll lose even the modest settlement she's offering. James signed without negotiation. I kept our house, my businesses, and Most importantly, my independence. James moved into a small apartment on the other side of town and took a job working for one of his former competitors, a man who had been at our anniversary party and had witnessed everything. The position was several levels below his former status, with a salary that barely covered his new rent. The social fallout was immediate and decisive. Our friends, many of whom had known us for decades, chose sides quickly. Some avoided both of us, uncomfortable with the public spectacle, but most reached out to me with messages of support, dinner invitations, and, in several cases, apologies. I should have seen how he treated you, our friend Claire told me over coffee a week after the party. All those snide comments over the years, the way he'd dismissed your opinions, I just thought it was, I don't know, your dynamic. I should have said something. You couldn't have known, I assured her. But that's just it, she insisted. You shouldn't have had to hide who you were all those years. You shouldn't have had to pretend to be less so he could feel like more. She was right. Of course, the most liberating consequence of that night wasn't the financial separation, or even the end of a marriage that had long since died. It was finally stepping into my own light. I stopped hiding my success. I changed the name on my business cards from my maiden name, which I'd used for my private investments, to my married name, which everyone knew. I accepted speaking engagements that I'd previously declined for fear of outshining James. I stopped downplaying my accomplishments in conversation. 3 months after the divorce, I started a financial consulting business, specifically helping women protect their assets and build financial independence. Many of my first clients were women who had been at our anniversary party, wives of James's business associates, who suddenly saw their own marriages in a new light. My husband doesn't know about my inheritance either, one woman confided during our first meeting. After seeing what happened with you and James, I realized I need protection, too. For the first time in decades, I found myself surrounded by women who valued my knowledge, my experience, and my story. The same community that had witnessed James's attempt to humiliate me now came to me for guidance. There was a certain poetry to it. Melissa joined my firm 6 months later. I got my MBA to work with Dad, she admitted, but I'd rather learn from the person who was actually successful all along. As for James, the last I heard, he'd reached out to Chloe again, hoping to rekindle their relationship now that he had a steady income. She blocked his number. According to mutual friends, he'd aged dramatically in just a few months. The confident, ambitious man who had planned to discard me was gone, replaced by someone bitter and diminished. I took no pleasure in his downfall. That surprised some people who expected me to gloat or seek further revenge. But revenge had never been my goal. Protection was, dignity was, and in securing those things for myself, I found something unexpected. Freedom. Freedom from pretending to be less than I am. Freedom from supporting a man who didn't value me. Freedom to live authentically for the first time in 30 years. And you know what the best part is? I'm happier now than I've been in years. It turns out that being respected for who you really are feels a lot better than being underestimated by someone who never deserved you in the first place. I still live in the same house, though I've redecorated extensively. I travel more. I've reconnected with old friends and made new ones. I started taking painting classes, something James always discouraged because it took too much time away from family obligations. Sometimes, I think about that night, about the look on James's face when he realized who had actually held the power all along. It wasn't about humiliating him, though that's how he experienced it. It was about refusing to be humiliated anymore. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Do you think James got what he deserved? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more stories like mine.